Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our round 2 DFS and betting live stream for the Travelers Championship. Going to break down what to expect from the course tomorrow, DFS, the prop side of things later on, and get you guys ready for all of your exposure. So first off, say hi down there in the live chat. Would love to see you guys down there in live. And of course, if you're watching this on replay, still love you guys as well. Go ahead and say hi down there in the comments. But either way, hopefully you're having a fantastic Thursday night, maybe Friday morning if you're watching this before lock, and are ready to get after it for the second round of action. A table of contents out here for this live stream. First off, going to focus on the golf course and the weather, give you a synopsis of what to expect from course conditions, and then afterwards we'll talk through DFS, and then towards the end, the third section will be focused on the prop side. So if you're just here for props, just hang in with us a little bit, hang in here for 20, maybe 25 minutes. We'll get to that towards the end. And if you're here for DFS, that'll be in about 5-10 minutes. So first off, let's check in on chat. We got Eric down there, Steven. Hopefully you guys are having a great night. You got Frank and Bart down there too. Hopefully you guys are having that solid evening and are ready to get after it. But before we hop into all the nitty gritty out there for Friday, just want to mention our sponsor and partner for this live stream. That, of course, would be the guys over there at the Ship It Nation, which are a great source for all of your DFS needs, whether it's golf, PGA DFS, Showdown, or a variety of different other sports like you see on the graphic there. They've got you covered regardless of what sport that you're playing, whether it's football, NBA playoffs, which just ended up finishing up. You have the hockey playoffs, same thing, right? Finishing up as we speak, but other sports like football to come, baseball, NASCAR, you guys name it, they are the source to go to. Over there, you can get a discount off any membership using code Luke10, and they're a great resource to have on top of me just for PGA DFS. They also do just offer a PGA tier, so even if you're not somebody that plays a bunch of other sports, they're a great source out there for your golf stuff too. So always a great shout out there with the Ship It Nation, and definitely a site you guys want to check out. We'll talk about them a little bit more towards the end of this live stream, but I know a lot of you down there in chat are already familiar with the Ship It Nation, but definitely a great crew over there. Let's go ahead and talk about the golf course, which for today played a little bit easier in the morning wave. Now, I think there's a couple of combination factors for that. First off would be the winds, which got stronger as the day went on, but also the receptiveness of this golf course. In the morning, you saw guys throwing darts, particularly out there on their first 3 to 6 holes. But by the time they got to the afternoon, their pack 9, maybe their last like 5-6 holes, they weren't getting that same kind of hole. They weren't getting that same type of zip that they were getting there in the morning wave. So if you're taking guys that are starting at, let's say, 10 a.m. or before, I think you might see a slight advantage out there for round 2. Now, the other factor on top of that receptiveness was the wind gusts, right? Was the fact that the wind got stronger out there in that PM wave. And if we take a look at the Friday forecast, and we'll go over here to the HRRR forecast, which tends to be a little bit more accurate, you'll see that it's not going to be as big of a difference. In the morning wave, there's not very much wind, very similar to what we had for Thursday, but the afternoon with a little bit of a chance of a thunderstorm. We'll talk about that here in a second. But the winds are pretty much non-existent. You can see right before the storm hits, the winds kick up a little bit. But if it is a thunderstorm that's supposed to come through, which if you check local weather sources, it is supposed to have some electricity involved, they're going to end up suspending play, right? So even if there's a storm coming through, there's some winds that end up kicking up, it's not going to impact the players because they'd be taken off the golf course, whether they end up finishing play that night or over there on Saturday morning. They're not going to have to play through any sustained period of wind. Now, I guess we'll talk about the potential of a delay. If they delay it and they have to finish on Saturday, I don't think that there's going to be a massive edge to be had, but maybe the guys that are finishing on Saturday get a slight advantage as there's going to be some rain involved with any storm that comes through. They're also going to have the morning softer conditions, but that would be dependent on knowing that there's going to be a delay tomorrow, and then you'd only be able to take advantage for maybe 3 or 4 holes out there with the end of your round. So play finished around, I think it was like 6 local time. So you can see the storms are supposed to come in around 5. So even if there's an edge, like I said, it's 3-4 holes for the last few groups out there. So I don't see an edge to go out there and stack the quote unquote PM guys out there with a delay. If anything, and honestly, and I stress that, if anything, I think the AM guys might get the better side of it. That's just due to the receptiveness, the pristineness of the greens that you're going to have out there. Because from the weather perspective, I don't see anything that's actionable. The winds don't kick up enough to say to only play the AM guys, and we don't have a definitive weather edge, definitive delay that's going to come through that could tell us to go out there and only play the PM guys. So just to circle through a few of these forecasts, just because that delay could be important. You can see this forecast. This is the HRDPS, which is actually a new model that they have here on windy.com. Is calling for the storm to come through closer to like 3, maybe 4 p.m. In that case, they would probably have to stop play, but could finish before the end of the day. If this forecast came true, maybe the PM would actually get an advantage, because in this model, they'd only finish half the round, maybe even less than half the round out there with the last few groups. And if that's the case, if you get some rain, you get some moisture out there with that storm, maybe they do see an advantage out there for the PM. So I guess when you take a look at some of the other models, right, you can see some of them aren't even calling for a storm at all. This Meteor Blue looks relatively clear. Icon model has storms, but it's a little bit more spread out. This GFS model is calling for it around 5, 6 p.m. And then this ECM model is calling for a pretty similar weather pattern to what we had on the HRDPS model. So they're all over the place. The timing of the storm is up in the air. I guess the two trains of thought for tomorrow, and I'll throw both of them out there. I'm not leaning into either one very much in my exposure, but you could take morning guys. Just hope that they get the better side of the draw. Maybe the delay doesn't give the PM an advantage. And hope that they get the receptive greens. The other side of that would be to hope that the weather delay potentially gives you an advantage and stack some of the later starters. So I could see an argument for both sides, but in reality, it probably ends up being a chalk up, right? It ends up being probably relatively even if we compare the quote unquote AM versus the PM guys. Because it's a signature field, I'll just remind you that there aren't defined AM and PM wave players. There's no hour, 2, 3 hour window between the two tee time waves. It's just a steady stream of guys off of hole number 1. So there's not going to be the same kind of polarization when it comes to the scores and with scoring conditions as what you'd get on a full field event when you have 3-4 hours between the two waves. So that's what I'll say for Showdown. It's obviously thrown off a little bit when you have this Showdown format. Obviously, we do our due diligence here. We go through everything that we possibly can with the weather, but I think a lot of it would be overthinking for round 2. If anything, maybe break your ties and take the morning guide just because you know that there's not going to be any weather coming through. You know for a fact that they're likely going to have receptive conditions. So I think if anything, like I said, you slightly favor those guys if you're trying to break a tie. And outside of that, I don't see anything that's all that actionable. So that's what I'll say about the weather. We have to talk about it as we do on every live stream. But unlike some slates, I don't think it's anything that you completely dive into and fully invest into. So I'm not going to have any 6-0s in either way, at least forced in 6-0s in either direction. Like I said, I made a few arguments for either wave, but just nothing that's definitive and nothing that I want to gamble on myself. Let's catch up on chat, see what's going on down there. Now is the time to throw any player questions down into chat. And we're going to talk some Showdown strategy. We're going to talk about some of the guys that I'm playing out there for round 2 to not just give you plays, not just give you guys to go out there and take in your lineups, but more so give you an idea of my process out here for Friday, show you some of the key stats that I'm looking for, showing you the sort of maybe live metrics that I'm looking for in players to go out there and target them for a solid round 2. We're going to look at some historical data with players, right? Guys that pop off on Fridays, et cetera, et cetera. So tune in. If you have any players that you're curious about, you want my take on specifically, just go ahead, throw them down in the live chat. Outside of that, we're going to talk about the guys that I want to in particular, right? The highlighted players. And then anything on top of that is up to you guys. So if you have anyone that you're wondering about, just go ahead and throw it down into the chat. So what do we got? We've got Frank down there, as I said before. He said, let's go crazy in round 2. Amen to that. Today was a break even across the board. I took a few round 1 Showdown lineups, ended up pretty much exactly break even. And then on props, it was the same thing. So no blood drawn, right, in either direction. No blood drawn from the sports books. No blood drawn over here on our side. We'll have to see what round 2 holds. Thomas the Tank Engine took over today. That's for damn sure. Steven is off to a solid start on his single entry. You'll love to see that. Cheers to you, Steven. And by the way, this isn't a beer. This isn't a Michelob Ultra. It is a Red Bull this evening. So we're trying to stay up, and I've got some video games to play and some props to get after. So a little Red Bull to give us a little kick in the ass, right, and get us going here. I do have a hat with my logo, Bart, which is right here, actually. So it's a little Titleist hat. It's completely dirty. I've got to throw it in the washer. That's why I'm not wearing it. But I have one. I need to make more of them. I actually have family members that want me to send them to them, which I promised I'd do. So I'm doing that anyways. And I'm going to make likely like 20, 30 of them, a few of them to give away here on the streams. So stay tuned for that. We'll likely have some sort of merch giveaway at some point. And yeah, probably just giveaways through the live streams and then likely through my Discord too. Maybe you can defend your win from last week in the community. Are you up there again, Cyber? I haven't taken a look at the leaderboard, but I'm assuming you are based on that comment. It's certainly possible, right? I don't know how many we have in there this week, but it should be a pretty good payout. I know last week, the $20 was a really solid payout because it was a $20 buy-in. So good stuff there, my man. What's going on, Samuel? What's going on, Justin? You cashed Scheffler and Schauffele top 10s for the round one finish. Yeah, I've seen a lot more people betting that stuff. First round leaders always popular, but people betting top 10s, top 20s for first round. Not something that I've done myself, but good stuff, my man. What's going on, Samuel? He said, who's my top bounce back candidate? So we're going to have a few that we talked through. I'd say Matty Fitz kind of comes to mind. He shot well over par today, and I think he could go low for round two. But we'll talk about a few. Nothing that really comes out as like a favorite, though. Maybe Matty Fitz. Let's see. And yeah, the thunderstorms are definitely in play. You're spot on there. What's going on? You said, if there's a delay until Saturday, will they change the hole positions? They will. That's why they have to wait about 45 minutes to an hour in between. Part of that is to set tee times, but that's the quick part. They can do that in less than 5 minutes. The hard part is physically changing the holes. Now, they get a little bit of the benefit of players like having to actually play the holes. So they don't have to have the 7 through 9 done. They don't have to have the back 9, right, like done until players get there, right? So they just have to like have 1 through 5 done by the time play starts, and then they can go and do 6 through 18 as players are on 1 through 5. So yeah, they do change the holes. It's kind of a logistical nightmare. A lot of that is like the unsung heroes of the PGA Tour, right? These greenskeepers that get all of that changed in between rounds. It's quite a debacle to get done. Yeah, they moved tee times up a little bit. So they're starting at 7. Yeah, and your last tee time's at like 1 p.m. So I guess they're trying to account for the thunderstorms. But if the early forecast, if the ones that are calling for it to come in around 3 are right, there's no avoiding it, unfortunately. So hopefully the ones that are calling for it to come around like 5, 6 are correct. But I like that they at least moved them up, right? That's a good move for sure. And they paired up Goddard and Sam Burns together. So there was the withdrawal before the event with Rory. You also had Benny and withdrawal today, which, by the way, screwed me over in some prop stuff today, but is what it is, right? Goes both ways when you have a guy withdraw mid-round. Great that they paired those two guys together and aren't sending them both out in one sums. If you're playing the weekend slate, that weather edge is looking like it could be playable. I'm not sure how it would impact Saturday, Sunday, as they have to redo the tee times. We have no way of knowing what it's going to be for Saturday, Sunday. So I think it'll impact Saturday, Sunday, not so much from actually doing a strategy. Let's see. The guys do you're saying you do a podcast with the big golf gurus. I have to check you guys out, Justin. Definitely could be interested. I'm always about collaboration. So follow me on Twitter if you haven't already. And if you already have, just shoot me a little tweet. So I know who you are on there so I can follow you back and message you so we can figure that out. I'd absolutely love to. Steven says, any of the bad form, good fit guys keeping their bad form to get you off them? Yeah, plenty of them, but there are a few that I'm playing. So we'll talk about a few, Steven, guys that were good fits that didn't play so well in round one. One of them being Matt Fitzpatrick, right? Somebody that fits the course, not the greatest form heading in, not the greatest form out there round one. There are guys like that I'm avoiding, plenty of them that I'm not getting back to. However, there are some that I will take a dabble on. I think that he's probably the nastiest example of a player that I will take despite him shooting well over par round one. But there are other examples of guys that are like even par, maybe -1, +1 that fit that description too. Locking cash besides Scotty. There are no locks in cash besides Scotty Scheffler. So there's no answer to that, man. Seth says you need one with just the logo. Yeah, exactly. So this was just through some like other site. I think I'm going to get them made through like a merch site so I can customize it a little bit more. That site was actually my mom gave me that hat as a little stocking stuffer for Christmas. And there wasn't any like customization on it. You kind of just had to send them your logo, that sort of thing. Give them some text to put on the hat, and that was about it. Yeah, the Titleist logo is nice. I got to say, I wore it golfing. That's why it's kind of cruddy like that. Nasty, though. You have a weird feeling Siwoo pops off. Siwoo could always pop off. So he's always viable to do that. Fang says, do I see Homa and Spieth to have a way to have a better round? So you're hoping for a bounce back, if I'm reading your question right there. So I think they both have a chance to. Spieth, I'd worry about a little bit more than Homa. Spieth is injured. Spieth's dealing with some sort of thing with his wrist. Last week at Pinehurst was by far his best week with the irons. And I have a very simple explanation for it. A lot of people have talked about the wrist injury and his unwillingness to interact with turf. Well, at Pinehurst, you had to pick the golf ball. It's a sand-based turf. It's not the kind of turf interaction where you could go down there and dig through it. Early in the week when it was a little softer, Thursday, maybe Friday, you could get away with that. That's coincidentally when Jordan Spieth went out there and hit like 15 plus greens per round. What did he do over the weekend? Completely fell off. That's when the course firmed up a little bit. And when you're playing off a firm, sandy-based golf course, I can tell you from experience down here in Florida that you can't take divots. Like you have to pick the ball. It's too firm to go in there and try and bounce into the ground. And for somebody that has a wrist injury, that's a real issue. This week at the Travelers, rain may save him, right? I think the weekend, if it softens it up, Jordan Spieth might be okay. Because if it's a soft course, he's going to be able to go out there and take divots. Round two, let me look at his tee time. Because if he's going off early, I'd worry about it. If he's going off late after the rain, great for him. So yeah, he has a late tee time. Maybe he lucks out. If it rains, it really softens up the course for like his back nine out there tomorrow. But, you know, I worry about it a little bit for Jordan, that's for sure. What do we think about Cantlay? I think he's a decent play. I think he's going to get ownership, though. So you're not going to be getting that different with a Cantlay. I don't think you'd expect to get different with him anyways. So you're probably not worried about that with Patrick. But 10:30 tee time is a decent starting time. Again, I don't think weather's a massive thing to worry about for round two. What I would worry about is how he played round one. And something to note, this is actually a perfect segue into our plays. I'll catch up on chat in a little bit. We'll go over all of your specific questions. But what I want to talk about with the top end of the board was the lack of ball striking form today. The only player that is priced $9,500 and above, so this is Hideki upwards, okay, that gained strokes on approach today was Xander Schauffele. Scotty Scheffler lost on approach. Ludwig lost on approach. Morikawa, Cantlay, Hideki, all of them lost with their shots gained approach. Now, Tony Finau didn't, right? Tony Finau went out there, was able to gain with his approach play, but all of the hyper elite players kind of luck-sacked it. And despite that, you'd think that, oh, these guys up top, right? If they're not gaining an approach, they're probably not doing shit. -5, -5, -3, -4. So they're going to get plenty of love up there, but I feel like they're closer to failing. They're closer to a disaster than a lot of people would realize that aren't looking at their shots gained metrics. So if you take a look at the running shots gained metrics, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. I'm going to go ahead and bring them up on the other tab here. So just bear with me 1 second here. But just to kind of cite some of the stats from today, Scotty Scheffler, for example, lost 0.12 shots gained on approach today. Now, Finau did a great job. Finau gained 3.4 shots gained approach. Right? So that's why I kept him out of that argument there. But Hideki lost 0.63 strokes. Collin Morikawa lost 0.34 strokes on approach. Just to keep going with this, Ludwig lost about half a stroke putting. So not putting today, approach play today. Patrick Cantlay lost nearly a stroke out there on approach. It was ugly stuff. So if you're going to play the top end of the board, just I would say tread with caution. To me, I have a lot later exposure than I typically would towards the top end of the board just because of that. So if there's one player that's immune to that, that would be Xander Schauffele. And he's not the highest owned option. I've got him as the second highest owned player on the slate behind Scotty Scheffler, as you'd expect, would be your highest owned player. But Xander Schauffele is the only one gaining on approach, is the one that I'm going to play out there for Friday. Moving on down to this 9K range, you have guys that have better form here, but also a few stinkers. So Russell Henley is inexplicably $9,100 now, right? He was already too expensive, $8,600 for the main slate. Now, because he was chalked for that, he's now $9,100 out there for Showdown, which means essentially no one's going to use him. He played horribly out there for round one. The pricing came out before he went out there and shot an even par. So at $9,100, if you want to take any pivot in this range, it's Russell Henley to some extent. I guess Keegan at 10%, you'd say would be some sort of a pivot. Even Hovland at about 14% ownership is low ownership compared to some of the other guys around him. But outside of Russell Henley, nobody would be a true pivot in this range. Even somebody like Sahith at -1 is well over the 10% ownership mark. You see Keegan Bradley, I still have it about like 10.4%. Guys like Sepp, JT are all going to be at 10% plus ownership. So it's pretty spread out up top. There aren't any players that are going to be mega low owned. You're not going to get any of those sub 5%ers, which makes it a little bit of a tougher showdown slate, right? There's not any of those guys that you could just throw in, get infinite leverage to the field, but it does mean that a lot more players are in play. There aren't as many egregiously chalky players that you just have to avoid out there in lineups. So what I'll say about the 8K plus range, pretty much 8Ks, 9Ks, definitely the 10K pluses, anyone that you want to play up there, regardless of their ownership, I would feel comfortable with playing. Whether it's a Scotty at nearly 30%, whether it's Xander at 22%, you name it, right? It really doesn't matter who the player is. Up top, no one is out of hand with ownership. No one is going to be like 40, 50% owned out there in GPPs. Maybe in a super small field single entry. You get some wacky ownership like that, but your large field contests are going to be pretty spread out from what I can tell. So knowing that with building lineups should give you a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more freedom when going out there and selecting your player pool to just take the guys that are your favorite plays, whether it's looking at approach metrics, whether it's looking at birdie or better percentage, whether it's just using pure fantasy point ceiling metrics that you have out there on your database, whatever the case may be, you feel free to use that is what I would say. Don't let ownership completely dictate your play up top. The place to do that, in my opinion, would be in the 8K and below range. So if you place it like, so Victor Hovland, I'm going to point out at $9,200. I think that it's a fair price tag, first of all. And on top of that, a high upside player that'll take aim at pins. Now, I'm not saying he's back, but today had a real scrappy -2 performance. And compared to some of the other guys up top, he played better when it came to his tee to green play. So just to give you an idea, he gained about 2 strokes off the tee and about a stroke when it came to the approach play. He lost almost 2 strokes of the putter. He lost around the green, which I would say the around the green struggles are pretty typical for Victor Hovland, but the putter is usually into the positive. So if he goes out there, he continues to hit the ball like he did out there for Thursday, just recovers and is even just a neutral out there with the putter, right? Let alone the upside to go out there and gain strokes out there with the flat stick. You could be looking at a really low round for Victor Hovland. So that's the kind of play that I like out there for round 2 showdown. If your process is more based on ceiling potential, right, just looking at past performance, trying to take guys that are routinely getting to 55 to 70 fantasy points out there on any given slate, then that would actually put you on guys like a Tony Finau that are high upside players, potentially an Aberg. He's been known to go nuclear out there on slates. I'm more so like the shots gained side, right? So that's why I like Xander, right? The one guy up top that was gaining with both ball striking categories. In fact, gained across all 4 categories today. Victor Hovland, same thing, right? Gaining across both 2 ball striking categories. Those are the sort of players that I'd prefer out there for my lineups. A little bit further down, Keegan Bradley, $8,500, is a player that I'll take with elite course history. He was relatively chalky heading into the week as he's a great course fit. He, of course, won this event last year, has started to look a lot better over his last few starts. So he had all that momentum, and then Today, didn't play horribly, right? -1 was just marginally worse than the field average, but because it wasn't a sexy -4, -5 round like you had from a few guys in this range, and it wasn't the -8 of a Tom Kim. Heck, it wasn't even the -3 that you had Harmon Fleetwood post out there a little bit more expensive than Keegan. A lot of your casual players would rather click on the -3s. They'd rather click on the guy that quote unquote played better, right, out there in round 1. Now, what I'll say about Keegan is that he didn't play horribly, right? -1 is respectable. And if you take a look at his shots gained metrics, he really got most into trouble around the green, right? He lost well over a stroke around the green. He lost with the putter. He gained over 2 strokes off the tee. So he hit the ball a lot better than you'd probably expect with that -1 score. And around the green is not a huge glaring weakness for Keegan Bradley, right? Him losing well over a stroke around the green is not something that happens very often. It's something that I'd expect to rebound out there for round 2. So with Keegan, it's partially the shots gained metrics. It's also the long-term pedigree at this golf course. Our winner here, last year, he made 6+ birdies in all 4 rounds. Something that obviously 6 birdies would be nice to have, but even if it's a 5 birdie round, be something that I'd take here this time. So next up, we got the Matty Fitz talk. So this is where we're going to start to get different. I mentioned the 8K plus guys going out there taking some chalk. Well, when you get to Matty Fitz and below here, and he's coincidentally $8,000 exactly, this is where I'm going to be starting to get different. Now, if you want to choose to get different up top, maybe take the Russell Henleys at low ownership and then maybe dabble on some ownership down low, take some chalk down here in the 7K range. That could be a viable strategy. Is it my favorite? No, right? Because the chalk down low usually isn't worth it. You're paying for slappies down low. You're paying for guys that aren't worth being 20% owned down there. Whereas up top, if somebody like Tom Kim's going to be super high owned, I kind of get it. Tom Kim's playing amazing golf. He was your first round leader. He's actually a multiple time winner out there on the PGA Tour. I'm not playing chalky Tom Kim. That's not to say that I'm using him in my round 2 lineups. I'm not, but I would totally understand playing him out there tomorrow as opposed to a super chalky player down low. So just to give you an example of some of those players, Akshay getting a ton of steam, as you'd expect for that -6 score. Taylor Pendrith also getting quite a bit of attention himself there with the -5 score. Will Zalatoris at about 15% ownership. Mackenzie Hughes at nearly 10% ownership. Kurt Kitayama at nearly 10% ownership. It's all the guys that went out there and smashed for round 1 that your casuals are going to flock to. And the one thing we know about PGA DFS is that it's volatile. It's a crazy sport. We see plenty of variance round to round. And the guys that played well one day are not guaranteed to go out there and smash round 2. In fact, of the guys that shot like -4, -5 or better, 1 or 2 of them are going to do it again tomorrow. Right? You might have one guy that's at -12 after 2 days. You might have a guy that's at -10 that's out there in second. And then third place is probably going to be -8 or -9. Right? Like if the scoring conditions are just like we had today, which is kind of what I'm expecting out there for Friday, that's likely what the leaderboard looks like. So if your lineups are all the guys that shot -4, -5, you might get one of them to go off. You might get one solid 50, 60 pointer, but you're not going to take down a GPP with that kind of lineup. And the bigger issue, it's not just the fact that you're not going to have all the guys that are going off. I mean, that's hard to do to begin with. We all know this. The bigger issue is that they're all mega chalk. They're all 20, 25% owned. Now, a little bit less than that with the guys down low, probably closer to like 9 to 15% on the chalk down there in that 6, 7K range. But the point still stands. It's much harder to go down and take down a big lottery contest when you're sharing players with 15% of the field, which in a lottery contest might be 1,000 other people or more, sometimes on major championship weeks. So that's the issue with the chalk down low. Up top, those guys are studs. They're worthy of taking at that kind of ownership. Down low, I'm not. So that's why I prefer to take some of my pivots down here. So here are a few examples of those pivots. So we've got Matty Fitz up first at 4.9%. He's played well at these shorter positional tracks. And though it hasn't necessarily translated to success at the Travelers, you'll see with his course history here, he hasn't played here much. Last year, just made the cut, didn't do much. I think it was no cut last year. So not really a accomplishment to go out there and make the cut. his other start here was a missed cut. So it hasn't translated at TPC River Highlands quite yet, but it has won the Heritage, has played very well at that course. Other courses that I use at comps like Sedgefield, TPC Southwind, for example, have been pretty solid for Matt Fitzpatrick. So I'll take a shot on him, even though he shot over par today, because essentially no one's going to use him. Max Homa there at $7,600, another player that I'll consider. Now, he's going off a little bit later, 140, but like I said, the weather's not a huge concern for me when it comes to my lineups tomorrow. I just think it's going to be pretty flat when it comes to your scoring conditions. What I more so worry about is that Max Homa is a high pedigree player that we're getting at $7,600, which is way too cheap for the kind of upside that he brings to the table, and he's 5.5% owned. The reason for that is he didn't have a sexy round. He has very middling form heading in, not really doing anything special. And he's really far back compared to guys around him, right? You got guys like Bazane at -4. You've got Batia, who went off, is going to be like 12, 15% owned there with a -6 score. Heck, even Siwu, Sunjay M at -1, -3 respectively are players that are going to get more attention than Max Homa. And what a lot of your casuals, I don't want to say they forget, but it's something that I guess they fail to realize when they're building lineups, is that the placement points aren't a thing. It doesn't matter while these players are starting. And for round two is where you can be the king of overreacting. Round two has only had an 18-hole sample size. We've only seen 18 holes of golf for all these players in the field. And the round two ownership is all on the guys on the top end of the board. It makes no sense. You've seen players out there for one single day. Players could have woken up on the wrong side of the bed. Players could have gone out there and had bad pin locations for their setup, right? Sometimes you have bad numbers out there with your rounds. There's much more variance involved with golf than people realize. And it's just the easiest way to go out there and play Showdown, especially for round two. Rounds 3 and 4, it's the same thing, but it's a little bit less impactful, I would say, as you get further into the event. But especially after round 2, don't overreact to 18 holes. When it's Saturday, Sunday, and you've had 2 days to react to, even that would be an overreaction. Heck, even for Sunday, when you've had 3 rounds to go through, right? Just because somebody is smashed for 54 holes does not mean they're just going to run away with it out there on Sunday. How many times have we seen leaders come back to the rest of the field? Just don't be an overreaction Andy, is what some people would call him. Like, don't be that guy out there and just go completely bonkers over an 18-hole sample and play all the chalk at the top end of the board. So I think Max Homa is somebody that benefits from that kind of mindset, because in a vacuum, Max Homa $7,600 would be 10, 15% owned. Right? Even out of form, you're still going to get guys that take a shot on him. But because of all the casuals out there that just want to play the guys that are playing well, I'm going to put that in quotes. Again, it's been 18 holes, right? Just remind yourself, 18 holes have been played for this golf tournament. Then Max Homa is the guy for me, right? If he's going to be a third or even 4 times lower owned than some of those other options. I like Justin Rose at $7,100. He's 4.6% owned. And what I like about Rosie is that he got really unlucky with his around the green play. So kind of like Keegan Bradley, also just, if besides the around the green play, played pretty well out there for the first round. And at $7,100, he fits these shorter kind of tracks. We saw him win at Pebble Beach. Pebble Beach was a strong field when he went out there and won that. I'm not saying he's going to win this event, but he does have some -4, -5 rounds in him when it comes to a short positional track like this. A little bit further down the board, Lucas Glover, also a player that I loved because of his comp course history. And at even par, he's not going to get a bunch of attention or a bunch of steam out there for round 2. I've got him at about 4.5% ownership. And at $6,800, it gives me some flexibility up top with my lineups. I don't have a bunch of cheap options. I actually have a guy at $6,000 I'm taking. I think there's a guy at like $6,300 I'm mixing into lineups. Maybe one at like $6,500, $6,700 as well that I'm playing in lineups. But it's only a handful of guys that I'm taking down there in the $6K range. Because I'm not super heavy on this top end, because so many of them are losing with the approach play in round 1, I'm a little bit more balanced with my exposure out there for round 2. And with lineups that I'm not starting with Xander, right? He's like the one guy up top that I'm really taking a stand behind out there in the 10K plus range. My lineups that are starting in the 9Ks just don't need a $6,000 punt. They don't need, a Malnati, who, for example, I'm playing out there for tomorrow. I'm not going to need him in lineups that don't have Xander Schauffele. So if I'm playing Xander, I'm probably going to need a punt to go out there and make it work. but a vast majority of my lineups are going to be using a Justin Rose as a 6-man in. That sort of player, right? There's a bunch of guys down here towards the bottom end of the 7K range that I'm mixing into lineups. Maybe it's a Lucas Glover that I'm rounding off lineups with at $6,800. You get the idea. So as you see here on the spreadsheets, for access to my entire player pool, all of my projections, everything that you see on these spreadsheets, make sure to check out the Patreon page. On there, you guys can see my entire player pool out there for tomorrow. And on here, I try to give you guys some perspective, an idea of what I'm using in my process out there for Friday. But on my Patreon page, you can get my actual exposure out there for tomorrow. You can see where my money's going to be out there for my action, where I'm actually going to be playing my lineups, and use that out there for your own process. So there's a link in the description out there to my Patreon page. On there, you can use my projections in your process, right? Copy and paste them into your optimizer, use those to go out there and build lineups, and look at my player pool. You can tail what you'd like, or you can fade what you like on there as well. But more importantly, it should give you an idea of how I'm attacking any given slate, right? Am I taking, more of a spread out approach up top? Am I really making my stands up top? What am I doing in the 6K range, right? So on and so forth. You can get a good idea of my lineup construction on there. A lot of those different trends out there with my lineups. And you can just ask me what I'm doing for any given slate as well over there on the Discord. So the Patreon is the place to be for all of that. And now let's catch up on any questions in chat. Where are we at? I had to scroll back and figure out the last comment we talked about here. What do we think about Cantley? So yeah, we talked about that. That's right. And yeah, just hit me up, man. We'll definitely try and figure something out for that. That'd be sick. It took a stand on Xander today. Who should you take a stand on for tomorrow to win all the money? So if I had to pick one guy to play, Kep, I know that's your bit out here on the live streams, right? And I love it. Victor Hovland is kind of calling my name. The stat profile just makes a whole lot of sense for Hovland. He's not that far off shooting something like -4, -5. So my gut's telling me Hovland. The stats are telling me Hovland. We're going to go with Hovland for that. Even possibly a Cam Young. I agree with you on that one. And yeah, you were saying Homa Spieth for a potential bounce back. I think Cam Young is a good fit for that too. And Frank, I'm playing him in my lineups, so it makes plenty of sense. Sweet. That's good to know, Justin. I'll either DM you myself if you don't DM me yourself beforehand. What's going on, Jimmy? You said, do I see a weather advantage? I don't. I think that if you have to break a tie, I'd rather have the early starter than the later starter. The reason for that is we know the earlier guys are going to have decent conditions. Later starters might also get the benefit of some rain. However, there may or may not be a delay if they have to play through some rain that actually might be a negative. If there's no rain that comes through, and let's say it's just windier in the afternoon, then it could actually be harder on that side too. So I think it's a toss-up. I think it's a little bit hard to account for. And I'm not playing the weather in either direction very much. Which chalk busted that was not expected to? I guess Russell Henley, but I don't know if even par would be like busting in terms of chalk. Let's see. Let's find somebody over par that was chalky. I don't know. There wasn't really that much chalk that like shot way over par. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think there was. Like, let me think about the cheap guys. Were there any cheap guys that were really popular? I guess Svensson. Svensson shot +1, but he wasn't mega chalk, that's for sure. He was sub 10% in most GPPs. Yeah, not really. I'm sure someone could find an example down in live chat, right, that has a piece of chalk in their lineup that didn't get there, but a lot of it shot even par or better. What's going on, Ross? He said, not sure how much coverage you saw. You didn't see any. I saw a good amount of it. But if I did, who passed the eye test? So eye test wise, that's a good question. I don't have an answer for you because I haven't really thought about it quite yet. But just thinking back to what I saw today, I mean, Scotty always passes the eye test. So we're going to leave that one out of it. The ESPN Plus groups were the main coverage that I was watching. The actual live coverage was jumping around just a little bit too much. to get a grasp on like anyone but the key players that they were following. I would say that Max Homa passed the eye test. He was hitting a lot of really solid shots alongside Scotty Scheffler. He had plenty of putts in that 6 to 10 foot range that he wasn't draining out there for round one. So Max Homa, from the ball striking perspective, was checking the eye test, not so much when it came to scoring, right? Shot even par. And to take a look at his shots gained metrics, Max Homa didn't get that much of a credit with his shots gained ball striking. It was about neutral off the tee. He was slightly into the negative with the approach play. He was slightly into the positive around the green, and then lost about a stroke and a half with the putter. Max Homa definitely played a lot better than that kind of stat profile. So yeah, maybe him, but I don't know. That's a tough question. I didn't notice that much today. Again, just 18-hole sample, so it's kind of hard to say with just 18 holes. Thoughts on Cantlay and Morikawa? I think they're both solid options. I'm playing both of them, just for transparency. Any place I can find top birdie stats? Yes. PGA Tour site has all of the stats on there. So the stat that you're going to want to look for are birdies or better percentage. That is the stats that you'll want for that category. Yeah, Tom is very good, Eric. Tom's an absolute baller. He's one of my favorite players on tour too. There is no cut this week. That is correct, as Joanne said. Derek says, thoughts on Jake Knapp? So Napster is, I don't love the course fit. That's the one thing I'll say about Jake Knapp. But the thing for his round 2 showdown is no one's going to use him. He shot even par. It's an unsexy score. He wasn't chalky heading into the week. So $6,500, I think he has some upside to go out there and make birdies, but it's not really a golf course where he'd be known to do that. I'd more so want to take him at a longer track like Mexico Open, a course with a bunch of par 5s that he can reach into. This golf course, par 70, it's only 6,800 yards, and there's a lot of layups off the tee. So we're more so looking for really good iron players and really good putters, because both of those players are going to set up birdie looks. So do I love Jake Knapp? Don't love him. That's the reason for it, right? Course fit. However, he's a stud. It's Jake Knapp, right? You can still go out there and play pretty well. Max Homa under birdies. I'll circle back to that when we get to props, man. We're not quite at that stage. So let's go over here to DraftKings, build a lineup together, and then afterwards we'll talk about some prop stuff. So just want to go through our thought process when we're going out there and building a lineup to give you guys some insight into what you should be considering when going out there and putting together a build. So the first things first thing you want to worry about when building a lineup is knowing what kind of contest you're entering, right? Before you're clicking names into a lineup, you got to know what the hell you're building it for. If you're in a lottery, your entire objective, by the way, this is something that I haven't talked about for a while. It's a topic that needs to be touched on. And I feel like a lot of people out there haven't had this conversation before. Your goal, your entire thought process for different contests has to be different. If we're playing in one of the lotteries, Big Field GPP, for example, our thought process has to be to get the absolute nuts, because the reality is of large field GPPs is that anything but first doesn't matter. Your long-term success in playing in like the big $5, big $20, whether it's main slate, showdown for any given slate, is all about your first place potential. It's kind of like a PGA Tour player. You're going to win a good amount of money for finishing like top 10s, top 20s in your career. But even Charles Howell III only made so much money going out there and finishing top 25 every single week. Where the real money comes in and where you find your real ROI playing those contests is by being Scotty Scheffler and winning first place. Going out there, winning a signature event, for example, which would be like a major championship GPP. Going out there and taking that down, that's what matters. Second place, min cashing, for example, out there in those big lottery contests, literally doesn't mean shit. For example, when I play the big $5, the big $20 GPP, there's not a big difference to me between having a 3x ROI in that big large field GPP in losing almost all my money in that big field GPP. Now, I'd rather make 3 times my money back. Don't get me wrong, right? But that's not going to do anything for my long-term success. The reality is in those large field GPPs, you're going to lose a lot more than you win, but you need to have the ability to actually take down first place. So when we're building lineups out there for those big lottery contests, you have to know that. You have to be like, you know what? I'm playing for first place. I'm going out there and I'm going to take a stand against the rest of the field Because if you don't, you're not building lineups the right way. So that's it for the lottery contest. That's first. That's one category right there. Second category would be the cash contest. It would be the complete opposite end of that. That would be like 50-50s. That'd be going out there, maybe playing head-to-heads, top 50 percenters, you name it, right? Those kind of contests where you're just trying to be better than the other half of the field, complete opposite mindset. There, you're just trying to have the best projection that you can possibly have. You're going out there and you're not trying to worry about ownership. You're not worrying about going out there and what everyone else is doing. You're focused on your own process and you're just taking the best plays. Large field GPP, sometimes you don't take the best plays. Sometimes you have to take a step back and say, you know what? First off, not all the best plays are always going to hit. Everyone knows that, right? So you kind of got to remind yourself of that and say, you know what? I'm going to take guys that aren't optimal because I have to beat everyone else. I have to beat 50,000 other people, right? So I'm going to take guys that maybe aren't as optimal but are lower rounds. For example, cash, you don't worry about that mumbo jumbo, right? Cash, you go out there, you take your highest projected plays per the dollar and you move on. The other category, which I find the most interesting and probably the hardest out there in DFS, would be your single entries, would be your smaller field GPPs where you're not entering 150 lineups. Maybe it's even a 2 to 3 max. Maybe it's a 5 or even to some extent, maybe a 20 max. But that would kind of be starting to get close to GPP range right there. But especially like a 3 max and below, right? Those single entry contests, you kind of have to have a blend of both of them because in those contests, they're still top heavy. So you still got to play them kind of like a GPP. But at the same time, single entries aren't played against 50,000 entries. They're not played against multiple thousand entries unless you're playing in the really big ones out there for like a main slate. In those contests, you're not as worried about ownership, but you still have to kind of consider it. So like those are the 3 different mindsets that you have to consider before building lineups. And it's going to vastly change the kind of players that you're going with. And before you build, you have to know this, right? Like you shouldn't just be like clicking names, be like, oh, I want to play Xander and Morikawa in my lineups. Like just know what the hell you're doing before you start clicking names, is I guess the point of that. I know it was a long-winded rant there, but it's important. If there's anything I've said in this live stream, that's the most important thing. That 2-3 minutes I just went through right there. So, all right, let's go through a GPP lineup here. So this would be like for a lottery. This would be us trying to beat like 20,000 other people. If we're going to enter the big large field lottery, I think that there's a lot of utility in perhaps skipping the top end of the board, which first off is going to give us extra salary. But the other added component of that is that all these guys are mega high owned. We're instantly going to be getting a bunch of leverage by fading this 10K range. So if we were to go down here, maybe start with a Cantlay as our first man in. Maybe it's a Hovland as our second man in. We drop down to this 8K range. We take a relatively low-owned Bradley, relatively low-owned JT. Maybe you don't like JT, you think he's a bum, you throw in a Sepp Straka, right? It really doesn't matter. This kind of lineup here, lineup construction-wise, I think it's going to be different, especially if we can make this like a bunch of 8Ks and then one 6K player. I don't think many people would go with that kind of build. So just for JT would be a little bit too aggressive there. But if we went down a little bit further and threw in a Matt Fitzpatrick at $8,000, I don't think many people are going to go with this kind of build, right? Because this would be a 9K, a 9K, 3 8Ks, and then a $6,200 or cheaper golfer to go out there and round this out. So whether you're using like maybe a Rogers, a Shank, Malnati, I don't know, there's a bunch of guys down there I guess you could consider for lineups. This, from a lineup construction perspective, is going to be really different. I don't think a lot of people would think to build this way, but from just a raw ownership perspective, this is also decent when it comes to your cumulative or product ownership as well. So large field GPPs, we try not to go overboard on the chalk. Sometimes you get different with lineup construction, right? Even if this was a more traditional lineup, maybe we try and get a little bit more different when it comes to the product ownership. But it's still not rocket science, right? It's about getting different in large field GPPs, setting ourselves up for success so that when our players hit, that we're not sharing them with a quarter of the field in all 6 spots. You know, if we have a 6-7K guy go off, that's a slappy, right? We want them to be a 4 or 5% owned player that you can actually move up with the leaderboards on, right? If they're like 20-30% owned, 20-30% of the field, a whole block of the field just moves up. Right out there with that player. And it becomes infinitely harder to go out there and take down that GPP Whereas if one of those optimal plays is, let's say, like a 3 or 4%er, and you happen to have that guy, well, now you're only playing against like 500 people, which is a lot easier than playing against a few thousand. So that's the large field GPP. If you're going to play cash, first off, don't play cash for round 2. I don't see a huge edge out there. Normally, I only play cash when I see a huge weather edge. And because I don't see that, I would probably stick away from it. And if I was playing single entries, that kind of thing, I would open up my ownership a little bit more. I might be willing to be a little bit more chalky out there in that kind of lineup. But it's kind of like I said before, it's a blend of the two different thought processes when you're going out there and building a cash lineup. It's not like I'd change it all that much, though, right? I think that those GPP lineups would be pretty suitable out there in single entries, just that maybe you'd be a little bit more chalky out there in those kind of builds. So we'll touch on any last-second DFS questions now, but that is all I've got for the DFS side of things. So if you were just here for Showdown tomorrow, first off, go out there and smash that like button. But that's all I've got for you out there for Friday. So hopefully you enjoyed the content, feel a little bit more prepared out there for tomorrow, and you're ready to go out there and take down a GPP or two. So like I said, the only thing I ask from you is go out there, smash that like button before you hop on out of here. And we're not done quite yet. So if you're still here for props, we've got a lot to talk through on that side. Some slips to enter in Underdog. We've got some prize pick stuff to talk through as well. So stay tuned for all of that. But for all my DFS people, if you were just here for that, I am going to touch on a few questions down there. So if you have any DFS stuff, let me know right now. But outside of that, that's all I've got for the Showdown side. So appreciate you guys. Like I said before, smash the like button if you haven't already. And we're going to tune this thing over to props here in a second. But let's see what we got down there in the live chat. Let's see. Thank you for your insights. Of course, Derek. Thank you for showing up in chat, man. Thoughts on McCarthy? I'm at like a 6 out of 10 on him. I think he's about an average play. I don't really have a big take on him. Am I going to live Nashville? I'm not. I live too far away, and the live events just don't get me up enough to go out there and travel like 7-8 hours for them. If they wanted to fly me out, right, that kind of thing, maybe give me like some sort of access to the course, I'd consider it, but not on my own dime. That's just too far. They play in Miami, though, every single year, so I check them out when they come down here. Max says, is Malnati worth the shot in the GPP? I think so. I'm playing him. You're not a big Tom Kim fan, I'm guessing. He's one of my favorite players, and I took him this week, so I'm on the other side, but I empathize with that thought process, right? Yeah, it feels like every time you fade a guy, they end up going off, and then vice versa, right? If you fade a guy, he ends up just like going off that week, and then you get back on him, and then they end up sucking. Like that's a long time story in DFS, it feels like. Yo, you were 2 guys off the optimal on Showdown. That's good stuff, though. Yeah, I'm sure that was close to taking down contest then, if you were 2 off of the optimal. What's going on, Max? He said, or would I prefer Webb over Malnati? I'd go Malnati over Webb, but I think both are decent options. What's going on, Doc D? You basically made your main slate lineup. Yeah, that's not the point of the live stream sites, but hey, you can do with the information what you like. You can tell it if you want to, but yeah, it's definitely not the point. Yeah, we'll look at some live stuff too, Curtis. Yeah, after we do props, we'll definitely look at live props. Remind me to take a look at some of the DFS stuff if you want. What's going on, Max? You said you like Hoagie tomorrow. Approach play was great. Putter, not so much. Completely agree with you on that. And in general, I like him for this event, of course. All right, let's talk about some prop stuff. So a few things to note. First off, the fairways were slightly harder to hit, at least in round 1, than what a lot of people were calling for. And then the birdies were harder to come by as well. So you can see the birdie average was only 3.9 per round. Bogey average didn't move much compared to what we had in 2023. Fairways didn't move all that much either, truth be told. Same thing with greens. It was pretty much identical to last year. But with the firmer conditions this time, those green complexes were a little bit harder to access. So those front pin locations, especially in the back, the second half of tee times there on the afternoon wave, you saw the bogey average really start to creep down. So I guess if there's one thing to note from the round 1 stat averages, it's that the birdies were slightly harder to come by. So I know we had a question, right, about some props on Underdog before. I actually think that there's going to be some value on fades. I took a lot of fades out there in my round 1 exposure, and I'm assuming that there's going to be quite a bit of value there again. So let's see what we've got. So they didn't have birdies up before. Let's see. So they have Zalatoris at 4.5. And then, yeah, Ricky was at 4.5 before. So I guess they did have birdies up before, but they didn't have like bogeys, a lot of the other categories posted quite yet. And now Prize Picks has a board posted too. So let me see what they've got up here. So 5 on Scotty, 4.5 on quite a few other players, including Corey Connors, that bastard. He got me today, that's for damn sure. And let me see, is he at the same number over here too? He is, yeah, he's at 4.5 birdies. So with the 3.9 average, we haven't looked at the pin locations yet. I won't be able to do that until we get off live stream here. But assuming that it's not going to be that much higher of a birdie average tomorrow, a lot of these guys at 4.5, you'd have to think would project under. And I was doing a little bit of research before we got on the live stream here, and you can see that over here on the Caesars site. So if we go over here and go to the birdie board, you'll see that players that are better than some of the other guys on the board are juiced under for 4.5. So just to give you guys a few examples, like Max Homa is minus 165 for the under. So I know we had the question about his under before. I think that would make some sense. But Tommy Fleetwood is minus 145. Sepp Straka is minus 155. Spieth minus 145. Even Wyndham Clark is minus 155 towards the under. So, like, not to pick on my boy Ricky Fowler, but like it's Ricky Fowler. I know he had a good day today. I took his under today and it did not pay off. He missed. Right? He went well over the 4.5 birdie mark. But if those other guys that are much better players, much more consistent players than Ricky, are juiced well under, imagine what he would be juiced, right? If he had a line over there on Caesars. So he's an example of the kind of player that I'd be considering for an under. I know Max Homa, somebody was asking about him. Is he still posted at that line? So yeah, he was ripped off the board. We could consider those sort of players out there for a fade. So let me see. There was somebody else I was eyeing before. So Ricky for sure was one of them. No, it's Jason Day could be in play for a potential fade. Who else? Wasn't Fleetwood. It wasn't Henley. Oh, sorry. Corey Connors was the other one. Sorry, that bastard that went out there and completely screwed me today. These sort of players, and we could probably even find better examples over here on Prize Picks, would be right for fades at 4.5. So, yeah, they actually have a lot more guys at 4 over here in Prize Picks. Underdog has a lot more guys at 4.5 when it comes to their projection. And it also looks like Prize Picks has their strokes board about 0.5 higher in a lot of different cases. Like, for example, I know Xander is at 66.5 on Underdog. He's over here at 67 over here on Prize Picks. And I'd imagine that a lot of the other ones are 0.5 discrepancies too. So just, I guess, good to note when it comes to the pricing. Greens and Reg, 13.5 for a lot of mid-tier iron players, it looks like. The fairway board looks pretty similar to round one. In fact, based on what I'm looking at here, it doesn't look like the pricing is any different at all. Other than that, Sanjay looks like he's 0.5 lower. Same thing with Corey Connors is 0.5 lower for a projection. All right, let's see. So I know for sure I want to play the Ricky prop. That is almost certainly going to get added. I guess it's just what I want to pair it with over here. And the other thing I was looking at before we went on live stream over here was the bogey props. So bogey average, just to circle back on that, was 2.2 per round, about 2.25 out there per round. Over here on Caesar/William Hill, you'll see that they have guys like Tom Kim at 1.5, and he's minus 190 towards the over. They have guys like Ludwig at that number, and he's minus 145. Victor Hovland is minus 170 over 1.5 bogeys, et cetera, right? Tony Finau, for example, is minus 190 towards the over. So the other thing I was considering was trying to find somebody at 1.5 bogeys and then taking their over there. So let's see who our options are at 1.5. I know a lot of them are at 2 now. Yeah, Keegan's not going to be at 2. Hideki's at 1.5, so Hideki could be on the board. Who else? Sahith could be on the board at 1.5. He made 2 today, so why not out there for tomorrow? Ludwig's at 1.5. He went under today, but still could be in consideration for an over. We've got Tony there, but Tony is a 0.9x multiplier, so that kind of takes away from it a little bit, but definitely still could take it even with that. You've got Cantlay, Hovland. Who else? Fitz. What is Fitz? Fitz is at 1.5 as well, so Fitzpatrick could be in play. I would ideally prefer to take like a PM tee time. So somebody going off when the conditions are going to get a little bit drier. It's going to be slightly harder to hold these green complexes. And just to see, did they have a Patrick Cantlay prop posted? So yeah, they do have Cantlay up, and Cantlay is at minus 170. I guess the beauty with Cantlay here is that he doesn't have the multiplier. So if we can compare him to some of the other guys, like we had guys like Tom Kim. Actually, sorry, he's at 2 bogeys, for example. But some of the other guys like Matty Fitz, Sahith, that were at 1.5. They're juiced similarly, I believe. Let's see. Do they have lines to compare to? So, yeah, it doesn't look like they have lines to compare to in every case. But you'd have to imagine that they're with the same kind of juice. So, I kind of like Cantlay at this course. So the only reason that I might not take Cantlay here, if you're a plus EV guy, you'd have no issues taking this. But Cantlay has an excellent track record around this golf course. So maybe I avoid him for that reason alone. We could fade Will Zalatoris. So Zalatoris was another fade that I was looking at before. This slip, actually, I took a Ricky Fowler under and a Will Zalatoris under out there for my round 1 exposure. And both went over, by the way, out there for my round 1 exposure. I might run these 2 back because I don't know. I kind of wanted to make this, right? If we can find an over on bogeys, the payout will be a little bit better. Actually, wait, is it the same payout? Am I capping about that? Wow, because they nerfed it. So normally if you take 2 different categories for fade, it would be 2.85x. They changed that down to 2.76x. So they ended up patching that. So I guess it doesn't matter whether we take a birdie prop or a bogey prop out there for this fade. So we'll leave the Zalatoris one in there for right now. But Fitzpatrick is on the table. Sahith was another one at 1.5, I believe. Let's see. Let's throw them all in here so I know who we can choose from. I guess Fleetwood would be on the table. I ideally want them to be teeing off later, and we don't have a ton of options that are going off later, unfortunately. Like you can see here, right? The last tee times at 1, so they moved them up. So I don't think that does us any favors. What is Brian Harmon's tee time? He's at 11. Yeah, definitely wouldn't call that late by any means. Yeah, Hideki's at that 0.9x as well. There's Aberg. So yeah, the tee times I don't think are going to help us here. The tee times are going to be pretty fucked no matter which option we go with. I guess what we have to figure out now is which shots gained profile is the best to fade. So if we're going through these on here, first off, Fowler had himself a really good day with the putter. Did hit the ball well, so we can't completely discount that. But Zalatoris had a little bit of a better day with the irons. He had a little bit more of a sustainable stats, shots gained profile. So I'm going to take Zalatoris out of here for right now. So we're definitely going to fade Ricky Fowler. I feel pretty good about that one. He luck stacked quite a bit today when it came to what he did. Matty Fitz, Fleetwood, or Thagala is going to be the guy that we pair him with. So let's go through these and find which one has the shittiest shots gained profile. So Thagala actually hit the ball well, but then lost a bunch of the putter. So we're going to take Sahith out. Even though he hit today, I'm going to take him out of there. So now we're choosing between Fitz and Tommy Fleetwood. And I can almost tell you for certain I'm going to go with Fleetwood. So if we go over here to Matty Fitz's stat profile, so Fitz ended up shooting +4. I know it looks horrible across the board, but he played a lot better than the stats would indicate. And then Tommy Fleetwood actually had himself quite a solid day, gained a bunch on approach. But if anyone's due for a little bit of a stinker, it might be Tommy Fleetwood. And even with gaining 2.4 strokes on approach, he still made 2 bogeys, right? So like even with a -3 round, pretty solid day overall, he still made a few mistakes out there. You know, that I'm going to fade Tommy Fleetwood here. At least that's the way I'm leaning for right now. So if you're going to enter anything in Underdog, I'm not sure if I'm going to enter this quite myself until we get off live stream and I can run my projections and do some comparisons. But I can tell you almost for certain that this Ricky Fowler will be in my portfolio. There's a good chance that this Fleetwood prop is also in my portfolio. And there's a good chance that I'm playing that Sahith fade at some stage. There's a good chance I'm fading that Will Zalatoris bogey prop at some stage tonight as well. It'll all just depend on, first off, doing that comparison, right? Checking my work, making sure that those are indeed value, and then trying to find the right pairings for them. Which, of course, just like my Player poll, just like my projections and whatnot, are posted over there on my Patreon page. But now let's hop over here into the prize pick side, which for strokes felt a little bit more fair because it's about 0.5 higher. I think that the pricing over here on prize picks is a little bit more adequate than what we have on the underdog side, at least when it comes to strokes. And you can say the same thing about birdies, right? Their birdies board is 0.5 lower in quite a few cases. Like, for example, Fleetwood was at 4.5. He's at 4 over here. Same thing with guys like a Keegan, a Brian Harmon, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're going to try and find some like overs for birdies, now I probably wouldn't do it with Ricky. You can see Ricky's at 4, by the way, right? 0.5 discrepancy compared to the other site. I would try and do it on guys at 4 that have a really good track record here. So, for example, Brian Harmon has 4 top 8 finishes at this golf course, his last 5 starts here. So 4 of his last 5 starts have just been absolutely lights out. Maybe you consider him for an over. Tommy Fleetwood, you can see they have him here at 4 birdies. I know I was picking on him a little bit when it came to the bogey line, but maybe even consider him for an over there at 4 birdies. So I think if you're going to take positive stance plays, the place to do it is over here on prize picks. There's potentially some unders on strokes that would make sense over here on the prize pick side. Overs on birdies, like I said there too. Let's do the pick 6 talk, and then we'll talk a little bit of live golf afterwards. So over here on pick 6, let's bring up the PGA tab and see what we're working with. So bunch of 4.5s and nothing lower, which is kind of interesting. Strokes lines are pretty comparable, I suppose. Not all that different than what we have on the other sites. I guess the Xander 66.5 is kind of interesting, but they did have him at that number on Underdog. Let's see, Zalator 68.5, English, Clark. Yeah, this is not my favorite board. Like an under on Connors would make sense. So normally I only play pick 6 when it's like a slam dunk board. In fact, I can't play it down here in Florida, so I can't get exposure myself. But I usually only tip plays out here for pick 6 when it's like super easy to find plays, because sometimes it is. I think if anything, maybe an under and Scheffler birdies at 5.5. Like I can tell you, compared to sports books, that's value, right? I guess just to show you this, to cite my work over here, give you an idea, right? Scotty Scheffler, if we go down here to his birdie line, he's minus 145. For the under at 5.5. So like maybe you take that, right? Maybe you take this under on Connors. I can tell you that would be a pretty decent value there too. But there's nothing here that is overly obvious when it comes to the value. So like if we were to go through this, like for example, maybe an over on Sanjay at 67.5. Like at least compared to sportsbook value, that would be a decent line discrepancy compared to what you can find elsewhere. These would be lines I'd consider. These 3, I guess, would be the quote-unquote slip that we'll go with here for the live stream. But it's not like some of the other slates where I feel like pick 6 has some of the better props. So at least as of right now, I think my favorite site is going to be Underdog, because I think there's quite a bit of fades that we can take for birdies, potentially for bogeys as well, over there on that site. Prize picks, depending on pin locations, if pins are straightforward, I might take some overs on birdies. We'll have to see how it's set up when I'm able to do a full deep dive. But yeah, as of right now, I think my favorite's probably Underdog. If I was going to do anything on prize picks, right, make sure you're being very nitpicky about who you're taking. Take some really good course history guys. If you're going to fade anyone on Underdog, just fade the slapdicks, right? That's why I chose, like, especially Ricky Fowler. Like, I hate to pick on the guy, but he's been dreadful out here in 2024. And then for pick 6, I'd probably keep your exposure light. It's just their payouts over there too on pick 6, if we're being honest, are pretty trash, especially when the field goes out there and hits a lot of props. When everyone's out there cashing their cards, sometimes you only get like a 1.1x payout from what I've seen, which is just absolute highway robbery. And frankly, if that's going to be the case, that's why I usually do more tips over here in Underdog and Prize Picks, as you don't have that same kind of problem. Now let's take a look at some of the live golf stuff. I don't know anything about this golf course, the Grove over here in Nashville. I don't believe they've played there before. I'm just going to bring up Data Golf in case and look it up, because I guess you never know. Maybe they did, and I'm just ignorant to the fact that they played there last year. But I don't think so, right? Yeah, no, they haven't played this Live Nashville course before. From what I understand about it, these Grove golf courses, I mean, there's a Grove down here in South Florida, the Grove 13. Let me just bring up the Live Golf site here, I guess. Take you guys through the scorecard. They're made for members. They're not made for tour play. So I'm not expecting this course to be overly difficult. Now, I don't have hole by hole breakdown on this. I don't have all the boots on the ground information from this Live Golf tournament, but just to give you guys an idea, it's a par 71, 7,300 yards. So I wouldn't call it a short golf course. That's for sure. It's at least about average length, but it's not going to be overly imposing either. So you can see on here, right, par fives, 629 yards. So it has some decent length there. Another one is 570. Your finishing hole is also a par 5. That one is 581. But then you also have par 4s that are 344, 414, 421 that are going to be pretty solid birdie looks. 404, 385, 394 that are all going to be pretty solid looks with a wedge. This golf course, I'd imagine, it's probably going to play half a stroke to maybe a stroke under par. And the birdie average, I would guess, would probably be around the 4 range. So if it's going to be about 4 birdies per round, which I would say maybe slightly above the Live Tour average when it would come to that metric, there'd probably be some overs on birdies that would make sense here. Now, the issue is we don't know that for certain, right? We don't have data to go off of. They haven't played a Live Golf event here. We have no idea how Live Golf is going to set up this golf course. For all we know, it could play super difficult. My recommendation with Live Golf for round 1, at least as a responsible, right, PGA Tour, fantasy tout out here, would say to wait, would be to not play round 1. That would be the responsible thing to say. Now, if you just want to watch and have fun, if you want a little bit of a sweat to go after, if I was going to say to bet any prop out there, right, maybe an over on Jon Rahm birdies. Reason I say that, Jon Rahm's a top 5 player in the world. He's by far the best player on the Live Tour. Even on difficult golf courses, right, sometimes he's able to get to 5+ birdies. So if you have to have a sweat over there, right, you just really want to bet something out there for the Live Golf, maybe you take this Jon Rahm prop. Outside of that, though, if I'm being completely honest with you, I don't know why play round 1 at a golf course that we don't know, right? It feels like a little bit of a risk, especially without having all of that data. The prudent move, probably the smart thing to do, would be to sit back, just wait for the data to come in after round 1, then round 2, round 3, have a lot more conviction with what you're going out there and playing. Now, like I said, because it's one of these Grove courses, which again, they have them all over the place. South Florida has one, the Grove 13, which is a Michael Jordan influenced golf course, is they're not set up for tour players. They're not set up to be the most difficult golf course in human history. So if anything, I think maybe the overs would make sense for some of these birdie lines. Let's see if there's any questions on chat. If not, we're going to hop on out of here. Let's see. Do my Patreon tools touch on single entry contests? So they're all usable for single entry, right? The projections for fantasy points are all for single entry contests. My player pool is my player pool for GPPs. For single entry, my recommendation, if you're just tailing the player pool, is to pick your favorite options from my player pool and then take them for your single entry. It's not like I have specific tools that are single entry tools. It's not like I have tools that are specific out there to GPPs either. It's all just on DFS in general. So yeah, you can definitely use it for that. And like I said, I play more large field GPPs. So that's the focus of my player pool, but it's not like I have different sheets based on contest, right? It's all just the fantasy stuff like you'd see on any other site out there. Fades on Spieth, yeah, that's not a bad idea, man. Even me, you guys know I like Jordan Spieth. The guy is broken right now. Why did I take fades? Oh my, I'm so. The end of these live streams, you get a little cooked when you just have to talk and yap for an hour straight. By the end, you start saying some stupid ass stuff. Let's see. So he's at 67.5 strokes. I know we didn't look at the stroke stuff before, but I know that's a discrepancy compared to a few other sites. You might have talked me into it because he fucking sucks right now. There's no other word for it. And excuse my language, but you truly have to be vulgar about it because he's absolute trash right now. So to give you an idea, at least for comparing him to a Prize Picks line, he's at 68 strokes, so he'd be 0.5 higher. If you want to find a pairing for Ricky and you don't want to take that Tommy Fleetwood with the 0.9xer, yeah, maybe you go with that fade on Jordan Spieth. I think that would make sense as well. Alrighty, guys, that is all I've got for this live stream, though. Hopefully you feel a little bit more prepared for your Friday action. Go ahead, smash that like button if you haven't already, and make sure you subscribe to the channel so you guys can catch us when we go live for rounds 3 and 4. If you enjoyed this content, you found it helpful for your process, well, make sure to tune back on in for our stuff out there for Saturday, Sunday. On there, we'll be previewing all the action for Showdown and for props, just like we did here. So make sure to come on back, tell a friend about it, go out there, grow the channel with us. Going out there, hitting the like button will help us do that. Obviously, subscribing to the channel helps us with some of our growth numbers as well. It can spread the love out there to the community a little bit. So best of luck out there, whether you're entering those GPPs, whether you're entering a few prop slips, and make sure to check out my Patreon page if you want all of the behind the scenes content. On there is where you can get access to those spreadsheets. And of course, on top of that, all the different prop slips that I'm entering. If you want access to the spreadsheets, join the DFS tier. So DFS tier is where you can download those spreadsheets, whether it's main slate or for Showdown. DFS tier gets all of those spreadsheets. The prop side of things, so that's the other tier that I have available for golf. That tier is where you can get all of my golf prop content. So that's Underdog, Prize Picks, Pick 6, all of that. If you want that content, well, make sure to check out that side of things. So that's all I've got. Like I said before, it's all the spiels, all the little plugs that we had to get out of the way. Best of luck, like I was saying, and appreciate you guys. I'll see you guys for the live stream out there tomorrow night.